everyone, to another episode of the Warriors in Business podcast. I'm Jordan, one of the hosts for this show, and we are delighted and excited to bring you another awesome guest today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast, as we are dedicated to elevating and promoting military, veteran, and first responder-owned businesses. Please share the show with your friends and family and subscribe to our channel to help us get the word out for the mission that we are on to elevate these businesses. So joining us today is Joanna Guldin. Joanna is a military spouse, is an entrepreneur and the owner of multiple businesses. One is she's the owner of the military lifestyle blog site called Jo My Gosh. She is also the co-founder of an online events company called Pillar, and she is also the social media manager for military.com. So with that thorough and awesome background, Joanna, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
We are delighted to have you here. Thank you so much. And I'm also joined by my co-host, Todd, who has recovered from his cold recently. Todd, how are you doing over there?
I'm doing better. I'm back among the living, and I'm really excited to have Joanna on the podcast. And just looking forward to getting to know you, Joanna, hear your story, sharing that story with our audience, and learning from you, and just having a good time. So looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Joanna, before we dive in, we first want to say how grateful and thankful that we are for your husband's service to our country, and as well for the sacrifice that you have made being a military spouse yourself.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes, of course. Well, let's dive right on in. Joanna, tell us a bit about yourself, about your journey as a military spouse, and then, what led you to becoming an entrepreneur.
Sure. So my journey in the military community began when I started dating my now husband more than a decade ago. We were friends in college and reconnected, weirdly enough, when he went to boot camp. I was also friends with his brother, who posted his boot camp address. And so I wrote John a letter, and he miraculously wrote me one back. And
oh, that's great.
Cool.
Yeah, it's like a very old school kind of story.
I love that.
Happened in the early 2000s.
I love that.
Those are the best stories.
Yeah, so that really started everything. We got engaged before he went to Afghanistan for a year. And when he came home, we got married. And during that time, so when I was dating John, I was a teacher in Baltimore City. I absolutely loved my job. Really thought that I was going to be there for a very long time. And of course, I fell in love with a sailor, and the U.S. Navy had other plans. And so we got married, and I left my beloved job and my beloved kids and went to Virginia. And at that time, licensing was not as reciprocal or as much of a big deal, I think, as it is now. Like, it wasn't so much in the consciousness of politicians and Americans. And so we made the decision that I wasn't going to pursue my career in education for the time being, just because it was an immense lift for financial lift to get recertified in a different state when we weren't sure what John's Navy career was going to look like and like where we were going to end up. And I really wanted to teach somewhere like with the stability of knowing that I'd be there for years, not just for a couple months or for a year here and there. Mainly because I just really love being part of a community,
Right.
and really wanted to, be able to be there long term. And so I ended up freelancing as a writer. And so is one of those kind of gifts that you get from military life that you didn't really know you were looking for. Because so I went to college as an English major and always wanted to write professionally,
Okay.
but also loved teaching. And so I decided to teach and try writing on the side. And when John was in Afghanistan, I started this blog called Jo My Gosh, kind of on a whim, just to be able to share care package pictures and little stories and things like that Honestly, just for like a few friends and my mom. And they were my readers, my first readers. And so, like, I think half a year into us being married, Pinterest exploded. And I went from my mom reading my blog to waking up one morning and like 40,000 people had read my blog. And that's not an
Wow.
Whoa.
exaggeration. Yeah, it was like, it was
That's
Wow.
literally
wild.
overnight. It was crazy. I thought it was a joke, like, but it just kept like picking up steam from there. And so, I was unemployed at the time. I was freelancing and doing a whole bunch of other kind of side things, like being a secret shopper. And I worked at a national park gift shop for a while. But nothing, I was definitely one of those underemployed military spouses that people often talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and but because Joe My Gosh had become more and more popular, I was able to really start a freelancing career, which snowballed into a bunch of different things, including the opportunities I've had in the military community, with military.com and with Pillar. So yeah, that's a very long story for how I got started, in in small business and entrepreneurship.
Well, I love hearing that. And by the way, it's fascinating to me, and I'm so glad you're sharing, your story with our audience because, most of the time, to date at least, we've had, entrepreneurs who are actually, military veterans, things of that nature. And you're a spouse of, of active military, and hearing your story to where when you met, you fell in love, and then all of a sudden you had to make this major move in your life. So first of all, that's selfless. It's so great that obviously you love your husband and you're supporting him and you're doing this new life together. But you had to leave a lot of things behind, and that's not an easy journey. I didn't go through it, but I'm just empathizing with that, and
Yeah.
that's a very selfless thing, and I love to hear that. But then beyond that, even though you did that, what was so, to me, which is so powerful of a message and what you're sharing in your story is that, you had to adapt. Okay, you loved teaching, and then you didn't know if you could do it in a new state because of the requirements and certifications, and you didn't know where you're going to be. But what did you do? You didn't crater. Okay, let's look for opportunity. You started doing things. You were proactive, and you started writing. And you found your passion, something you were passionate about, and you did that small, and then, as fate would have it, all of a sudden Pinterest blows up and it starts blowing up. I mean, what a fantastic story. That is very, very encouraging. And I think just one little lesson in that, to anyone listening is, whenever life throws things at you where you have to make, challenging decisions or changes or pivots, just be proactive. Don't sit around waiting for things to happen. Go happen to things, make decisions and do things and put things in motion. And another great thing of this is that this led to entrepreneurship for you as well too. And I believe that military spouses have an incredible opportunity in entrepreneurship because of those underemployment challenges and because of those you don't know where you're going to be next year, next 6 months, or wherever it may be, wherever your spouse may be deployed or change locations. And I think entrepreneurship is a fantastic way to do that, and you're now the epitome of that. And again, thank you for sharing that. I'm really enjoying listening to this.
Oh,
I'm
well,
learning.
thanks, Todd. I want to caveat it because when I tell it now, it sounds like, oh, all these things fell into place and like all the dominoes were set up and they just fell over. There were a lot of tears and a lot of, the first year of our marriage was very difficult for me when it came to my career. I was always a very like career focused person, and I didn't realize how important that was to my self-worth. And so when I left my job as a teacher at the end of the school year. And so like I had a normal summer, and then all of a sudden all of my friends and colleagues were going back to school. My parents are also teachers, so they went back to school, and suddenly I was in an apartment in a place I didn't know, and just utterly like crushed. I can't emphasize that enough. Like it was a hard realization that that I had tied so much self-worth to my career and like who am I now that I don't have that anymore. And so,
Yeah.
that's something that I feel like we don't often talk about. And I also don't want anybody who's listening just to think that I was like this very sunshiny person who, found a bunch of opportunities. I did, but it was really hard. And it's okay if it's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's a hard realization, right? When you come face to face with something that you maybe didn't see before, you maybe had to learn the hard way. How do you think you worked your way through that? Do you think it was just simply by circumstance of moving that you had to adjust and had to adapt as time went on? Was it conversations you were having, with family and friends, maybe others that you were meeting from, some of the freelancing that you were doing? How did you work your way through that?
My husband and my family are so supportive and always believe in me, even when things sound a little crazy.
Yeah.
So, John was so incredibly supportive and would constantly tell me like, that I was more than my job, or something that was really hard for me was like not getting a paycheck, which I had no idea that was going to really wreck my self-worth as much as it did.
Yeah.
And so like all of that, like he was so incredibly understanding. And then, my friends, my family, were all like really supportive and shared stuff about Joe My Gosh and put me into contact with people when contacts could be made. I also found a fantastic military spouse blogging and influencer community online,
Okay.
through various, Facebook groups and things like that. But I met so many incredible military spouses who were doing similar things or were entrepreneurs in a different vein, but we could all kind of come around some of those same themes to support each other. So that was wonderful too.
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That is awesome. That's really fantastic. I think that, when I look back on my professional career, I've dealt with tens of thousands of entrepreneurs over the years, and it's kind of interesting since we started doing the Warriors in Business podcast. When I look backwards and I look forwards, when I look backwards on the entrepreneurs, a common theme at a high level was always about when talking about what led them to become an entrepreneur, what led to their success, and what was something that was really not very prevalent when I look backwards at non-military entrepreneurs is that they never really talked in terms or used language like support group, talked so much about their support of their, support groups and people around them and their community. It was usually more about maybe their spouse, which is normal if they were married, and maybe they had a mentor. Maybe they would seek out a mentor. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But that was usually kind of the extent. When we've been doing this Wars in Business podcast, just like I heard you share, Joanna, it's and everyone else we've interviewed, it's a common theme that we hear. It's my spouse, my family, the people around me, the people in the military, my support group at church. It is really the common theme there is that they make sure and surround themselves with people who are really there to help lift you up.
Yeah.
And I think that is just something that I didn't serve and Jordan didn't serve. Our family, immediate family didn't. We have family members that served in the military and first responders as well. But I can't appreciate it like you can. But it's just something that is, I don't know. It's just innate, almost, and so prevalent and palpable in the military, veteran, first responder people and their communities and their families that they really, really, really look for that support. And it means everything to them. I mean, the gentleman we interviewed last week, he was talking about as soon as he was done and he transitioned out, he said, he had opportunities to move out of city, out of state, and he said, no way. He said, my support group here got me, my wife and family through that when I was deployed, and I'm not going to leave them. They're that important to me. And those kinds of things are just extremely, they just stick out. And I didn't mean to go on too long, but I guess I'd kind of go back and ask you a question, on a level of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how important is a support group? Not only you, but for people that you know and you've met in the military community. Is that a common theme, or is that just a coincidence that we've, had the last 10 people say these same kind of things on these podcasts?
I've never thought about it before. I guess for me, I think that it really was a form of networking. So we lived in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is a lovely town. That's where John was stationed the majority of the time that we were married, or that we were married when he was in the military.
Yeah.
And so we lived away from an installation, and didn't really have a strong group of like a strong core. Like we weren't living on base or anything like that.
Okay.
So my support from the military community really came from people I met online. And I have noticed with those people in particular, who I've been friends with now, some of them going on like 12 years, like more than a decade of friendship and knowing each other, that is very important to them. Like there's so many times where I will meet someone at a conference, or I will be in their area and I'll like let them know like, hey, I'm coming in, like, can we meet up? And like we'll meet each other and we'll be talking, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, we've never actually met each other in in real life.
Yeah.
It just feels so natural and real, and we've carried our friendships around the country, or in some cases around the world. And so those, I think there's a lot of military spouses and military spouse entrepreneurs that have really found their people online, because you can take them with you wherever you go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's especially with terms like, deployments and having to pick up and move. Countless military families have lived in multiple cities and sometimes multiple countries around the world, because of their service or their husband's service, just having to take them wherever they go. It's interesting how that just the means of social media and networking online through Facebook, through Pinterest, has brought this community together, especially when they are sometimes so spread far apart. Would you say that's an accurate description?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think just in general, the ability to meet up online, to get together, to ask questions and all of that of each other is really important, but also just the ability to have a remote job or to have an online business is something I think that the military community in particular is so maybe grateful for, might be the right word,
Yeah.
or the right phrase, that that's something that other military families did not have, you know 30 years ago, even really 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
So it opens up so many possibilities for how you can continue your career or start a business and not have to worry about your physical location,
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're not constrained geographically, and that's, I think there's good and bad in technology, but that is definitely the good side, creating those opportunities for what we're talking about. And I think your story is going to be very inspiring to a lot of people listening, and kind of taking this a little bit step further. So back to, you woke up one day and you thought literally it was a joke because Pinterest, blew up your followers to 40,000, and you were like, what is going on? So all of a sudden this happens. So maybe kind of push that forward a little bit, fast forward that. What did you start doing? Like, how did you actually, because, your family and friends are reading your blogs, and all of a sudden now this is happening. So at what point in time, how did it kind of resonate, and at what point in time did you kind of say, wait a minute, I can make this out of, I can make a business out of this. And what did you do, pushing forward to become an entrepreneur? All of a sudden you were in a classroom not long ago, and then all of a sudden now you're blogging, and now you've got this exposure on Pinterest. So then what? What happened after that?
Yeah, it was really a like a light bulb moment or a watershed moment for me. because I really did not start out to be a professional blogger at all. I just, was sharing stuff about my life. And so I really started thinking strategically about what I was sharing, how I was sharing it. Just even little things like I really got up to speed on SEO. I started learning about Pinterest and actually how Pinterest worked because I had not even heard, I mean, this was such early days of Pinterest. Like, I had not heard of that social media site
Yeah.
prior to it. It was brand new. It was as if, like, well, with Threads blowing up a couple weeks ago, like, all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, what is happening? The world's changed. So, and I really started thinking about what I wanted to do with Joe My Gosh. Like I said, being strategic, not just in like what I knew as far as skill sets, but also as far as, how do I like, what do I want to actually do with this? Like, what's my vision? And I've always really wanted it to be a place for military spouses and significant others to be able to be encouraged and be able to learn and not feel alone. When John was deployed to Afghanistan for a year, and I was like, I had no idea what was going on. I wasn't from a military family. I didn't really have friends that were experiencing the same kind of things that I was. And I lived in Baltimore, which is not like a military heavy city, So, and I was hundreds of miles away from where John was, stationed out of. So all of the people, the family supports that were there were also hundreds of miles away from me.
Yeah.
Um, so I've always thought of Joe Mike, and when that happened, I should back up. When that happened, I went online to find support because I just did not know how to like do a deployment. My point of reference was legitimately like movies about World War II, which is not
Wow.
like that's not a point of reference
Yeah,
that you
right.
should use when you're, living in the 2000s. So,
Yeah.
so I found, again, I found online communities. I found other bloggers. I read about like what was happening and tried to learn more about what deployment was and like all of those kinds of things, how to support myself through deployment. So that's always what I've wanted Joe My Gosh to be. And that's how I've tried to really stay true to that thread of what Joe My Gosh is. And that kind of has like blossomed in different ways. I became friends and colleagues with a bunch of military spouse bloggers, and some of us wrote a book together. We
Oh, very
that was
good.
all about military spouse life from our perspective. I've spoken at different things. I've participated in a whole bunch of things. And then this newest outcropping of like that mission is Pillar, which is just totally focused on supporting military spouses and significant others through deployments.
That's awesome. It's I find it unique that for the things that you were searching for knowledge, for community, for support, that you did connect with those individuals and those groups online, and then you went and did it yourself. It was something that meant so much to you that you have now created that through Joe My Gosh, and it's like taking the baton and just passing it along from one to the other, and especially to serve this particular group of people that are in need of support, are in need of community, that it's really neat to hear that you took it from something that you just needed personally and then made a business out of it. I think that's a lot of what is part of the heart and soul of a lot of businesses. It was something that meant so much to the individual that they then took it and built it into something replicable to be able to share with other people. And so I love hearing how you did that yourself.
Turn passion into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
That's really what you did.
Yeah, I think if you're going to spend so much time on something, you should at least like doing it, and you should feel
Totally
like
agree.
your
Hopefully so.
time is worth, is being spent on something worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does it work then? Because you have, sounds like you have, you know, several businesses on the side, and then you also, what exactly do you do for military.com? So that's kind of fascinating that you get to do that as well.
Yeah, so for military.com, I am immersed in the world of military news, which is always fascinating. Todd, I mentioned before that I love history.
Right.
And I particularly, weirdly enough, have always been really drawn to military history. And, even before I met my husband, I just, as like literally, as like a weird little first grader, like I was reading books about wars and things like that. So it's something that I've just always been really intrigued by, and that I find interesting. So yeah, so I get to work with a phenomenal group of journalists and content creators who are very, very passionate about telling the story of the military community, and supplying really good information about benefits news and about what's going on in the military community and in the wider world, and how that affects what happens to military families.
That's awesome, and you get to do that, and still, it's unique. It's a unique situation you have, and because you get to do that for military.com, and you also have these other businesses that you do on the side. By the way, do you sleep? That's the first question I want to ask you. So,
I do.
how do you do all of this? I mean, time management is a real thing, right, in our lives, because time is the great equalizer in everyone's life. And so how do you do that? Like, as in, you know what I mean? Make sure that you get that job done and then build your business. How are you doing that in your schedule? How do you manage that?
Did I mention that I have a very supportive husband and family?
You
No.
did.
It- I should probably not say this because this will maybe take us to a different tangent, but when my husband left the military, he actually built a business as well, a coffee shop business, and we had two coffee shops. We just recently sold them, and it was a fantastic journey. But there for a while, we had a lot of businesses under our hat that we were all working on together.
Yeah, you have to learn to become a professional juggler at that point.
Yes,
To be able to manage all those things well.
I
It's
think. Oh, I'm sorry, Jordan.
oh no, please continue.
I was just going to say, to answer your question, Todd, I think it's about um, knowing when to say yes and when to say no. There's a lot of things that I cut back on with Joe My Gosh, because they weren't taking me in the direction that I thought Joe My Gosh needed to go. It's also about knowing who to reach out for help. So I work with other people who help me run Joe My Gosh. Or with Pillar, we pull the right levers to ask people to help us, with their skill set. And then it's also, I think, knowing what's important in your life. So there are non-negotiables that my husband and I have, and there are things that are just more important to me, honestly, than any any business or any amount of money. I have two sisters who live out of state. One lives in Switzerland, the other one lives in Ohio. And I have in-laws that live 3 hours away. And when they come to visit us or we go to visit them, like everything stops. And that's just how it's gonna be. And that's okay if I miss out on an opportunity or whatever, because at the end of the day, the people in my life are way more important um, than anything else.
You're right. Life, the people in our lives that that we love the most, people and those connections, pardon me, are most important. So I like that perspective. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time, but I like that you're showing that by literally, okay, everything stops because people whom I love and want to spend time with and don't always have the opportunity to do so in person, they come first. Now everything else can halt, and then because that'll be there once they're gone, right? I love
Yeah,
that perspective.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, Joanna, I want to ask you a question in regards to Joe My Gosh, and this is in reference to nowadays how much everything is online, and when so many people are building businesses online and they wish to gain traction and frankly eyeballs looking at their site and paying attention to what they offer, services or products or otherwise. So how did you, like you mentioned the Pinterest, you blow up, go into 40,000 in the next morning. How did you eventually scale your business, market your business? Did your community and following grow by word of mouth? Was it paid advertising that you did online? Was it events that you went and did? Was it speaking engagements, or was it kind of a combination of all those things? And I asked that question just because of how many people are using things online, but also the difficulty to get everyone to pay attention to what you're doing specifically, right? When everyone's saying, "Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, I'm doing that," it can be very tough to gain traction and actually build a customer base or client base for what they want to do. So how did you do that?
And by the way, before you answer, I didn't mean to jump in, just to kind of put a whipped cream and a cherry on that. When we have surveyed the military, veteran, first responder, entrepreneur community, and like, what are your top challenges for your business? Typically, historically, when you ask that question in national surveys, the answer is access to capital. And that is high. It's actually number 2 when we surveyed. And what beats it out just a little bit, believe it or not, is how to grow our business and acquire new customers. And so we love asking that question because we like to hear everyone's story. And what if there was one or two things, most important things that you said that would have led to the success of your business growth and revenue, what would those things be?
So I think for me, it was about building Joe My Gosh to be something that's sustainable. So I recognize that evergreen content, content that lives pretty much forever, that isn't necessarily tied to a particular, one moment or one event in time, did really well for me. So I worked on creating a lot of evergreen content that I thought, when I stepped back and looked at it, that it offered value to readers. Because at the end of the day, that's really what I want people to do. I want them to take away something. I want, like, that 22-year-old kid that I was to be able to read something and feel like she or he has found something to help them make it through the next day of deployment or the next PCS or whatever that is. So just being really, really strategic about what your audience is looking for, like what your ideal audience needs and is looking for, and then creating content based around that can live on for a long, long time. And so, for example, there are some articles on Joe My Gosh that I literally wrote 12 years ago that people still go to.
Oh, wow.
That, that time that I spent being strategic has really paid off. Like, and not necessarily, I mean, in a monetary sense, but like in a maintaining my business sense. Like, it is still good quality content that people come to, and that they get some value from it. And so, for somebody who owns a website and, my business is primarily funded by advertising. So that means the longer that people read articles that are on Joe My Gosh, the longer they stay on the site, that generates revenue. And that's how it is for any website that has ads. That's
Right.
not something that I've come up with.
Yeah.
But I think that value and authenticity and really thinking about what your audience wants, rather than at the beginning of writing Joe My Gosh, I was writing what I wanted to write. And so I found where that nexus is, like, what does my audience want to read? And also, what do I feel really confident writing about?
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing really, and probably lends to the authenticity part too, is that I think that people, especially if you have an online business, there's a lot of stress I think that people have around doing all the things, right? Like being on TikTok, being on Instagram, being on Facebook, maintaining a
Yes.
presence on LinkedIn. If you have, then if you've got like an online business where you're actually putting things like in an online store, you have to keep maintaining that. You have to send out orders, or like in my case, you have to write more content. Writing content takes time. So I think there's always this emphasis on like, do all the things. And I have found that when I do things that I don't want to do, and I mean like truly don't want to, not just like, oh, I'm not feeling like that today. But if there's like a
Right.
particular platform that like I just don't like or cannot get involved with, for whatever reason, like I feel like it's a waste of time, or like I will tell you, one of my weaknesses is video. I don't like creating video. I don't like editing video. I am a writer. That's what I like to do. And so
Yeah.
I've found that honing in on the things that make sense and work for you, and either outsourcing the ones that you're not passionate about, or saying, you know what, I don't have to be all things for every platform. That's
Yeah.
okay, is
Right.
very freeing, and it gives you time to do things that you're actually joyful about doing
Right.
instead of things that you're forcing yourself to do. Because people pick up on that, and people know when you're like doing a thing just to do a thing versus doing a thing because you love it and because you're good at it.
That's right. No, that's great advice. I mean, it's really, really, really good advice, because I see so many people actually trying to do everything and do it all. And again, focus on what you are good at, focus on what you enjoy doing, and delegate or outsource the rest. Or sometimes it may just not do it at all. So anyway, great advice. Before we wrap up, I have one more thing I'd like to ask you. Final question from me, and that is, for any military spouse, I'm gonna be specific on this question. Because you are one, and because you have and are living, that life, and now become an entrepreneur. For any military spouse that's listening, and maybe she or he is maybe they're new into that life, right, into that life phase of their life, or maybe they're not. Maybe they've been around and been in it for years, but yet maybe they don't have fulfillment on that professional side. And kind of like your comment resonated with me, because I hear that a lot, which is when that paycheck is taken away, when I didn't have that anymore, it affected your self-esteem or your self-worth. And that is important to a lot of people, and I understand that. So for those individuals listening, that military spouses in particular, that are on the fence of, what am I going to do? Like, what can I do to have fulfillment, in my professional life, especially if I have a lot of time on my hands? Do I go get a job? Do I become an entrepreneur? You went down the entrepreneur path, which I love, and which everyone, I think, has enjoyed your story. What advice would you give them if you met them on an elevator and it was 50 stories tall, and you had a minute or two to say, this is how I encourage you, because they said, oh, I know you, I know you, Joanna. Oh, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm a military spouse. What advice would you give them if they're considering entrepreneurship?
I think I would say that entrepreneurship is a fantastic journey if it's what you want to do. And it's not necessarily for everyone, and that is okay.
That's right.
Um, and I think really taking some time to think about, the things that you love and what you want to do, is so important. I had a lot of experiences when John and I were first married, because we had student loans. We needed a new car because both of our cars died like within the first month of getting married. Like
Oh
we were
no.
under a lot of financial stress, and so I felt like I needed to just jump into whatever I could. Um, and so I think, but that whole time that I was kind of kept jumping around and just trying to make some money for us, um, I was thinking about like what I loved and what made me happy and what skills I had and how could I use those skills. And so even if you're changing careers, or going to, you're going from being a teacher to being an entrepreneur, there are so many skills that you can take from one job into another job. And think strategically about that, because everybody has gifts, and you can definitely create your business to to showcase those gifts that you have. And it's okay if it's different from all the other businesses that you see on the street. It's probably preferable that you're doing it different.
Yeah, just to be unique and provide something of value that nobody else has provided before. Because it's only you that's doing it, and there's no other you walking around. So that's a wonderful advice. Well, as we come to a close here on this podcast episode, Joanna, we allow for plugs on this podcast, so please share with us how everyone listening in can get in touch with you for Joe My Gosh and for anything else you want to mention.
Sure. So Joe My Gosh is at JOMYGOSH.com. I'd love for you to come over and check it out. And we are getting ready to open the doors to Pillar, which is a digital retreat for military spouses and significant others who are either preparing for deployment, going through deployment, or think that sometime it might be on the horizon. So really, that's every military spouse or significant other. It's completely free to go to. Everything happens on replay too. So if you don't have time, you think, during those 3 days, that's okay. Grab your free ticket at pillardeploymentretreat.com.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. And for everything that Joanna mentioned, we will include that information in the podcast description below. That way you can get in touch with her for not only for Joe My Gosh and their community, but also for the virtual digital event with Pillar as well. So it's exciting. Exciting you guys have that free event upcoming soon, and great timing for us to talk with you on the podcast here about it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It has been a pleasure and an honor speaking with you today. And for everybody listening in, thank you for listening into this podcast episode. Please go to the various podcast channels, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please subscribe and share the show with your friends and family. You can also check out some more information about our podcast at warriorsinbusiness.com. Additionally, if you are a veteran business owner or first responder business owner or even an active military business owner, because we've talked to a number of them as well, you can sign up for your free business listing at joinbravery.com. That's joinbravari.com to sign up for your free business listing. And because we are creating an online marketplace for military, veteran, and first responder owned businesses. So you can check us out there, sign up for your listing. And once again, thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. And until next time, God bless and y'all be good.
And you'll see me rise up now.